Nearly 2 years after my wife fell down the stairs, I had almost accepted that I was slowly losing her forever. Every doctor called it Alzheimer's, until one neurologist stared at her. Test results looked me straight in the eyes and quietly closed the office door. "I need you to stay calm," she whispered. "If what I'm seeing is correct, your wife isn't just sick." She slid a report across the desk. My hands started shaking before I even read it. One sentence was enough to turn my entire family into suspects. If this story already has your heart racing, hit subscribe to Revenge. Dad, you belong here. Drop a comment and tell me what city or country are you watching from. Right now, I read every single one. Some details in this story have been shaped for storytelling and educational purposes. Any similarity to names or places is coincidental, but every lesson here is one worth carrying. The summer Marcus Cole first walked through our front door, the magnolias on Magnolia Drive were in full bloom, and my wife Eleanor had spent all afternoon making her famous peach cobbler because she said any man worth Diana's time deserved a proper southern welcome. I stood at the kitchen window watching him step out of his car. Silver BMW, freshly washed, not a scratch on it. He was broad-shouldered, moved with the easy confidence of a man who had never seriously doubted himself, and he carried a bottle of wine in one hand and a bouquet of yellow roses in the other. Yellow roses, Eleanor's favorite. Diana must have told him. "Dad," Diana said, slipping her arm through mine as we walked to the door, her eyes bright in a way I hadn't seen since she was a little girl on Christmas morning. "Please be nice." "When am I not nice?" I said. She gave me the look that daughters reserve for fathers who have just said something that doesn't deserve a real answer. Marcus shook my hand on the front porch firm grip. Not aggressive, the handshake of a man who had practiced being exactly what every father wanted to see. "Mr. Garrison," he said, "Diana says you built the Harmon Street Bridge. I drove over it on my way here. Remarkable structure." 32 years as a civil engineer, and the Harmon Street Bridge was still the project I was proudest of. My chest swelled a little despite my best efforts to remain measured. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron, and Marcus presented the yellow roses with both hands, like he was offering something genuinely precious. Eleanor's cheeks went pink in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. "You didn't have to do that," she said, but she was already pressing her face into the blooms. My son Patrick was the last one to the door. He was 27 that summer, living in Atlanta home for the 4th of July weekend. He shook Marcus's hand with considerably less warmth than I had, and I caught the look he threw me over Marcus's shoulder, quick and sharp. The look of a man who has already made up his mind but knows better than to say so out loud just yet. Dinner was everything Marcus needed it to be. He asked Eleanor about her 30 years teaching second grade at Forsyth Elementary, and listened the way people rarely listen, leaning forward, elbows on the table, genuinely engaged. He asked me about tidal waterway construction and soil compaction, and when I started explaining load distribution, his eyes didn't glaze over. He asked Patrick about his project management work in Atlanta, and quoted an article on Georgia infrastructure development, inviting Patrick's opinion, as though it actually mattered to him. Patrick ate a forkful of cobbler and said pleasantly enough, "You're very well prepared, Marcus." Marcus laughed, warm, easy, effortless. "Diana warned me you were the sharp one." "She says a lot of things," Patrick replied. His face stayed perfectly neutral. I filed that away and didn't think about it again until much later. After dinner, Marcus and I sat on the back porch with sweet tea, while fireflies started their slow blinking in the yard below. He told me about his corporate consulting business, restructuring companies, reorganizing finances. He spoke without boasting the way a man speaks when he doesn't feel the need to convince anyone of anything. "Diana deserves stability, Mr. Garrison," he said. "That's what I intend to give her." I looked at this man on my back porch in the Georgia evening fireflies drifting between us, and I thought Diana finally found someone worthy of her. Later, after Marcus drove away and the house went quiet, Patrick found me in the kitchen rinsing glasses. He leaned against the counter with his arms crossed, jaw tight. "Dad," he said, "something is off about that man." "That's called being charming son," I told him. "There's a difference," Patrick said, "between good with people and good at performing for people." I told him he'd been working too hard. He said goodnight, and I heard something in his voice, not anger, just the quiet frustration of a man who knows he won't be heard. I should have paid more attention to that sound. I shook Marcus Cole's hand that night and believed I was gaining a son. That was the most expensive mistake I ever made. The first time Diana didn't answer my call, I told myself she was in a meeting. The second time, I left a voicemail and spent the rest of the afternoon glancing at my phone like a man waiting on test results. The third time, 3 days later, Eleanor answered for me by saying what we were both thinking. Walter, something is wrong with our daughter. It didn't happen all at once. That was the cruelest part. Marcus Cole didn't walk into our lives and immediately steal Diana away. He did it slowly, the way a slow leak ruins a foundation. You don't notice until the crack is already in the wall. The first year after that summer dinner, Diana still came home for Thanksgiving and Christmas. But she arrived later than she used to, left earlier, and Marcus always had somewhere to be by Sunday afternoon. Diana would hug me goodbye in the driveway, with that particular tightness of a woman trying to hold two worlds together at once, and I would watch their silver BMW disappear around the corner and tell myself this was simply what happened when children built their own lives. By the second year, the holiday visits stopped. Marcus has a work event, Diana would say over the phone, her voice careful and measured in a way it had never been when she was growing up. We'll come visit in the spring. Spring became summer. Summer became the following Christmas. Eleanor stopped setting 2 extra places at the table and started keeping her hurt feelings behind a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. And every time I saw that smile, my chest ached in a way I couldn't name. Patrick called me on a Tuesday evening in February of the second year, his voice tight with the kind of controlled frustration that meant he'd been sitting on something for a while. "Dad, have you noticed that Diana never talks about herself anymore?" he said. "Like her own thoughts, her own opinions. Every time I call her, she only talks about what Marcus thinks, what Marcus wants, what Marcus says about things." I was sitting in my recliner in the living room, the evening news murmuring in the background. "She's married Patrick. Couples start to..." "It's not that," Patrick cut in, and his voice cracked slightly with the effort of staying calm. "I called her last week to ask how her job was going. She got that promotion last year. Remember, she loves that job. And she spent 20 minutes telling me Marcus thought she was working too many hours and should consider scaling back. Not what she thought, what Marcus thought. Dad. She used to argue with me about everything. That woman had an opinion on every single topic under the sun. Now she's an echo." The word landed in my chest and stayed there. Echo. "I'll call her," I said. "I'll talk to her." But when I called Diana the next day, Marcus answered her phone. "Sir," he said, warm and easy as always. "Diana's just stepped out. I'll have her call you back." She called back 2 hours later and talked for 20 minutes about nothing that mattered, and when I asked directly, "Diana, are you happy?" she gave a little laugh that sounded like something she'd rehearsed and said, "Dad, of course I am. Why would you even ask that?" The visit to Charlotte was my idea. I didn't tell anyone I was going, not Eleanor, not Patrick, not Diana. I drove the 4 hours on a Thursday morning in March, telling myself I just wanted to see my daughter's home, see how she was living, put my own mind at rest. Diana answered the door with a smile that flickered at the edges when she saw me standing on her porch unannounced. Behind her in the hallway, Marcus appeared within seconds, not from the living room, not from upstairs, but from right behind her, as if he'd been standing just out of view. "Walter," he said, extending his hand, the smile perfectly calibrated. What a wonderful surprise. Come in, come in." The house was beautiful, immaculate in a way that felt less like a home and more like a showroom. Everything in its place, nothing personal on the walls, no stray shoes by the door, or coffee mugs left on the counter. Diana moved through it carefully, like a guest in someone else's space, and Marcus moved through it like he owned every inch of air inside it. Every question I asked, Diana Marcus answered first. "How's work, sweetheart?" Marcus leaned forward from his armchair. "Diana's been thinking about taking on a different role, haven't you? Something with better hours." Diana nodded. "Marcus thinks the commute is too much." "How are your friends? You used to mention Jennifer." "Jennifer's going through some things," Diana said quickly, her eyes cutting briefly to Marcus. "We haven't really stayed in touch." When Marcus excused himself to take a phone call, I reached across the coffee table and put my hand over Diana's. Her fingers were cold. In March, in a heated house, her fingers were cold. "Diana," I said quietly, leaning forward so only she could hear, "you can talk to me, whatever it is." Her eyes filled up so fast it startled me, Those were the eyes of a woman who had been waiting for someone to say exactly that for a very long time. But then Marcus's voice carried in from the hallway something about a conference call, and Diana blinked hard and pulled her hand back and straightened her spine and became someone else right in front of my eyes. "Dad, I'm fine," she said, her voice steady and bright and completely hollow. "I promise. You drove all this way for nothing." On the drive back to Savannah, I called Eleanor from a rest stop outside of Macon. My hands were unsteady on the steering wheel, and I needed to hear her voice. "How was she?" Eleanor asked immediately. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel for a moment before I answered. My throat felt thick and wrong. "She's fine," I said, and hated myself for using the same word Diana had used, that empty armored word. Eleanor didn't say anything to that. She knew me well enough to know that when I said fine, I meant anything but. 6 months after that visit, Marcus called me on a Sunday afternoon with an idea. His voice was warm and reasonable, the way it always was when he wanted something. He'd been thinking, he said, about Walter and Eleanor's financial management at their age, with Eleanor's health beginning to show some concerns. Wouldn't it make more sense to have Diana help oversee the accounts, just to make things simpler, just to make sure they were taken care of properly? "You've worked so hard your whole life, sir," Marcus said. "You shouldn't have to worry about paperwork and bank statements on top of everything else. Let Diana handle it. She's your daughter. Who better to trust? I thought about Diana's cold fingers on that coffee table in Charlotte. I thought about the hollow brightness of her voice. And then I told myself I was overreacting, that Marcus was right, that this was Diana's way of staying connected to us, of being useful, of closing the distance that had grown between us. "That's very thoughtful," I told him. "I'll talk to Eleanor about it." We said yes within the week. I have thought about that phone call every single day since the truth came out. The way his voice never changed pitch, never pressed too hard, never gave me a single reason to say no. He didn't steal access to our accounts. I handed it to him. I handed it to him because I missed my daughter, and I thought this was a way back to her. God help me. I thought this was a way back to her. By the spring of 2024, Eleanor had stopped recognizing her own roses. That was the detail that broke me more than any other, more than the mornings she called me by her father's name, more than the afternoons she sat holding a book she'd already read 3 times without knowing it. The roses were hers. She had planted every one of them along the back fence the summer we moved into the house on Magnolia Drive 31 years ago, and she had tended them every spring since with the kind of quiet devotion she brought to everything she loved. Deep red ones near the gate, pale pink climbing ones along the fence posts, one stubborn yellow bush in the corner that she called Harold. Don't ask me why she'd named it before I ever thought to question it. On the morning of April the 8th, I found her standing at the kitchen window, staring out at the garden with her coffee going cold in her hand, and something in her expression made my heart drop straight through the floor. "Ellie," I said, coming to stand beside her, "what are you looking at?" She turned to me with those blue eyes that had looked at me with love for 35 years, and she said in a voice that was perfectly pleasant and completely lost, "Walter, who planted all those flowers out there, they're very pretty." I had to set my own coffee mug down on the counter because my hands had started shaking, and I didn't trust myself not to drop it. I pressed my palms flat against the counter and breathed through my nose and said, "You did, sweetheart. You planted every single one of them." She looked back out the window with a small, polite smile, the smile of a woman being told something she didn't quite believe but didn't want to argue about. "Did I?" she said. "How nice." That was a Tuesday. Diana arrived at 8 o'clock sharp, the way she did every morning, now her key already in the lock, before she'd even knocked. She came through the door carrying a white paper bag from the bakery on Drayton Street, the one with the lemon scones Eleanor had loved for 20 years, and a fresh weekly pill organizer, color-coded and meticulously filled. "Morning, Mom," Diana said, bending to kiss Eleanor's cheek with a warmth that made my throat tighten in a way I couldn't explain yet. "Morning, Dad. Did she sleep okay?" "Fine," I said, watching Diana set the pill organizer on the counter with practiced efficiency. She had a good night. Diana opened the organizer to Monday's compartment. She always set it up a day ahead. She said so there was never any confusion and shook 2 small white tablets and 1 pale blue one into her palm. She filled a glass of water at the sink, carried both to Eleanor at the kitchen table, and crouched down to Eleanor's eye level the way you would with a child. "Time for your morning vitamins, she said, her voice gentle and bright. "The blue one, first remember, Dr. Hartley says that one works best on an empty stomach." Eleanor took the pills without question, swallowing them one by one with the patient compliance of someone who has long since stopped wondering why. Diana patted her hand and smiled, and Eleanor smiled back, and watching the two of them from across the kitchen, I felt simultaneously grateful and hollowed out in a way I had no language for. I took my coffee out to the front porch to give Diana room to help Eleanor with her breakfast, and that was when Evelyn Marsh appeared at the fence line, pruning shears in hand, her silver hair bright in the April morning. Evelyn had lived across the street for 22 years. She was the kind of neighbor who brought chicken soup when you were sick and remembered every grandchild's birthday and had never once failed to wave from her porch when you pulled into the driveway. She was also, I had come to realize, one of the most reliable barometers of what the neighborhood thought about any given situation. "Morning, Walter," she called out, resting her pruning shears on the fence post. "Diana here already?" "Just came in," I said. Evelyn shook her head with a warmth that made her whole face crinkle. "I don't know how you got so lucky with that girl, I really don't. She is here every single morning, rain or shine, weekends included. My daughter calls me twice a week, and I count myself blessed." She pressed a hand to her chest. "You raised her right, Walter. You and Eleanor both." I nodded and said thank you, and meant it. But something about Evelyn's words sat strangely in my chest, like a note played just slightly off-key too, right somehow. Too perfectly what you'd want to hear. Back inside, Diana was washing Eleanor's breakfast dishes, while Eleanor sat at the table working a crossword puzzle with a pencil, filling in letters, slowly occasionally erasing, with a small frown of concentration. It was a good morning. Eleanor had good mornings and bad mornings, and this was by recent standards a good one. "Diana," I said, leaning against the doorframe, "I've been thinking, there's a new neurologist over at Savannah Medical, a Dr. Voss. Somebody in my woodworking group mentioned her, said she's very thorough. I thought maybe we could get a second opinion on Mom's treatment plan." Diana's hand stilled in the soapy water for just a fraction of a second, so brief I almost missed it. Then she turned with a reasonable smile that didn't quite warm her eyes. "Dad, Dr. Hartley has known Mom's case for nearly 2 years now. Switching doctors mid-treatment can actually be disruptive for patients with cognitive decline. Consistency is really important." "I'm not talking about switching," I said. "Just a second opinion." "I hear you, Dad. I really do." Diana dried her hands on the dish towel, folding it neatly the way she always did. "Let me look into it, okay? I want to make sure we find someone who specializes in exactly Mom's presentation. I don't want to take her somewhere that isn't the right fit." She glanced at her phone on the counter, tapped the screen briefly, checking something, always checking something, and slid it back face down. "I'll do some research this week." She said the same thing the next time I brought it up, and the time after that. That evening after Diana had gone, and Eleanor had fallen asleep in her chair in front of the television, I sat at my desk in the back room and stared at the wall for a long time. Something was scratching at the edges of my mind, something I could feel but not see clearly, the way you sense a storm coming before the sky has given you any real reason to believe one is on the way. I thought about the way Diana's hands had stilled in that soapy water. I thought about the phone she always turned face down after checking it, and how she always checked it immediately after giving Eleanor her pills. I thought about the pale blue tablet I didn't recognize. I picked up my phone and searched the name of the neurologist my friend had mentioned, Dr. Lillian Voss, Savannah Medical Center, specializing in complex neurological cases. Her number was right there on the website. I did not tell Diana I was calling. I did not tell Eleanor. I made the appointment for the following Tuesday morning, and I sat with the confirmation number written on a notepad on my desk, and I told myself I was probably overreacting, but I wrote that number down in pen, not pencil. Pen. I told Eleanor we were going for a drive. She loved drives. Even now, even on the mornings when her mind was somewhere distant and unreachable, putting her in the passenger seat of my truck with the window cracked, and the Georgia air coming through seemed to settle something in her. She would watch the live oaks go by with their curtains of Spanish moss, and sometimes she hummed old songs she couldn't have named, and for those stretches of road, she seemed more like herself than at any other time. I did not tell Diana we were going. That fact sat in my stomach like a stone the entire drive to Savannah Medical Center. Diana called at 8:47. I watched her name light up the dashboard screen and let it go to voicemail, and the guilt of that small act twisted in my chest so sharply I had to force myself to breathe through it. She was my daughter. She had given up her mornings for 18 months to care for her mother, and I was sneaking Eleanor to a doctor's appointment like a man conducting surveillance on his own family. But I wrote that number in pen, and I kept driving. Dr. Lillian Voss's office was on the 4th floor of the medical center, a corner room with windows facing the river. She was younger than I expected, early 50s, with close-cropped silver hair, and the kind of steady, unhurried attention in her eyes that immediately made you feel like you were the only patient she had seen all week. She shook my hand and then crouched slightly to take Eleanor's hand in both of hers. "Mrs. Garrison," she said warmly, "it's very nice to meet you. I love your earrings." Eleanor touched her earlobes with her fingertips, small pearl drops I had given her for our 20th anniversary, and smiled with genuine pleasure. "Thank you. My husband gave them to me." "He has good taste," Dr. Voss said, glancing up at me with a small smile. My throat tightened so fast I had to look at the ceiling for a moment. Dr. Voss spent 40 minutes with Eleanor, not the usual 15. 40 full minutes, memory assessments, coordination tests, reflex checks, and a long, quiet conversation about Eleanor's childhood in Valdosta, her years teaching 2nd grade, the names of flowers she could and couldn't remember. I sat in the chair against the wall and watched my wife navigate the questions with varying degrees of clarity, and every time Eleanor faltered, every time she reached for a word that wasn't there, I felt something tighten another notch in my chest. When Eleanor was settled in the waiting area, with a cup of tea and a magazine, Dr. Voss asked me to come back into her office and close the door. She sat across from me at her desk and folded her hands and said, without any preamble, "Mr. Garrison, before I say anything else, I want you to know that I'm going to be direct with you. I've found that most people, when something is genuinely wrong, would rather hear the truth plainly than have it softened into something comfortable. I'm an engineer," I said. "I've always preferred load-bearing facts to decorative ones." The corner of her mouth lifted briefly. Then she leaned forward and her expression became something I can only describe as carefully serious. "I've reviewed the records your wife's previous physician forwarded over, and I've compared them with my own examination today. The progression pattern I'm seeing is not consistent with natural Alzheimer's development. The air in the room changed, or maybe it was something in me that changed." "What does that mean?" I asked, and my voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. "Alzheimer's disease follows a recognizable trajectory," Dr. Voss said. "It has patterns in the types of memories lost, in the neurological markers, and the rate of decline. What I'm seeing in Mrs. Garrison doesn't follow those patterns. The decline has been unusually uniform and unusually consistent. And there are compounds in the blood work I ordered this morning," she paused, choosing her words with precision, "that have no corresponding prescription on file for your wife." I gripped the arms of the chair. "Compounds," I repeated. "Substances that shouldn't be there," she said simply. "Think of it this way, Mr. Garrison, there are medications that, taken in small daily doses over a long period of time, don't knock a person unconscious. They don't cause obvious symptoms that a family member would immediately notice. What they do, very gradually and very quietly, is put the mind to sleep. They cause confusion, memory loss, disorientation, symptoms that in an elderly woman look almost identical to the early and middle stages of Alzheimer's disease." The room tilted. I pressed my feet flat against the floor to keep myself anchored. "Are you saying someone has been giving Eleanor something that is making her appear sick when she isn't?" Dr. Voss held my gaze steadily. "I'm saying the evidence suggests your wife's condition is being maintained by something external. Whether it began that way or developed that way, I cannot say yet. But I can tell you that if the external factor were removed, there is a realistic possibility of significant cognitive recovery." My hands had started shaking. I pressed them flat on my thighs and told them to stop. The way I used to tell my crew to hold position on a job site when the ground wasn't stable, they didn't entirely listen. "Who manages your wife's medications, Mr. Garrison?" Dr. Voss asked. "My daughter," I said. "Diana, she took over about 2 years ago. She comes every morning. She fills the weekly organizer. I stopped. The words dried up in my mouth. Dr. Voss did not react to the name. She did not change expression. She simply picked up her pen and wrote something on the notepad in front of her, and the scratch of that pen against the paper was the loudest sound in the world. "I'd like you to do something for me," she said, "and I need you to do it without alerting anyone to what we've discussed today." She slid a small written protocol across the desk, a replacement medication schedule typed and signed with her name and credentials at the bottom. "I'm going to give you a 2-week supply of a substitute compound, same size, similar appearance. I want you to replace whatever is currently in your wife's organizer with these. Do not tell your daughter. Do not change Eleanor's routine in any other way. And I want you to call me in 14 days. I looked down at the protocol in my hands. My vision was blurring slightly at the edges, and I realized with distant surprise that my eyes were burning, the particular burning that comes right before a man who hasn't cried in 20 years cries against his will. "Dr. Voss," I said, my voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. "If you're right about this, if someone has been deliberately—" I couldn't finish the sentence. The end of it was too large to fit in my mouth. Dr. Voss leaned forward and said, with a gentleness that felt like a hand on my shoulder, "Mr. Garrison, I have been practicing neurology for 26 years. I saw a case with similar markers 10 years ago. I know what I'm looking at." She paused. "I'm very sorry, but I need you to be strong for your wife right now. Can you do that?" I folded the protocol carefully and put it in my shirt pocket right over my heart, and I said yes. In the elevator on the way down, Eleanor slipped her hand into mine and said brightly, "That doctor was very nice, wasn't she?" "She was," I said. I squeezed my wife's hand so tightly she made a small sound of surprise, and I said, "I'm sorry, Ellie, I've got you." She patted my hand with her free one, the way she had done 10,000 times over 35 years, and said comfortably, "Of course you do, dear. You always have." I cried in the parking garage, just for a minute, just long enough to get it out before I had to drive us home. Before I tell you what Dr. Voss called to confirm about those pills, the call that made my hands shake for 20 minutes, drop 5 in the comments so I know you're still here. This is the moment everything started to become real. This story contains some fictional elements added for educational and storytelling purposes. Names and certain details are coincidental, but the warning signs I'm sharing with you are ones every family should know. I waited until 11:30 that night. Eleanor had gone to bed at 9, the way she always did now. Early evenings, long nights, the particular exhausted sleep of a mind that had been working too hard to stay present all day. I sat in the living room with the television on and the volume turned down low, watching the light under the bedroom door until it went dark, and then I sat for another hour just to be certain. The house on Magnolia Drive made its nighttime sounds around me, the settle of old wood, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of somebody's dog 2 streets over. Sounds I had lived with for 31 years and never once had reason to fear. Tonight, every one of them felt like a held breath. At 11:30, I got up and went to the kitchen. Diana kept Eleanor's pill organizer on the 3rd shelf of the cabinet above the coffee maker. She had chosen that spot herself 18 months ago, because it was easy for Eleanor to see but not so low that it could be knocked over. I had thought that was thoughtful at the time. I had thought a great many things at the time. I took the organizer down and set it on the counter under the kitchen light. My hands were steady. That surprised me. After everything, after the parking garage, after the drive home, after sitting in the living room for 2 hours with the weight of what Dr. Voss had told me, pressing down on my chest like a structural load I hadn't accounted for, I expected my hands to shake. They didn't. They were the hands of a man who had spent 32 years solving problems that other people couldn't see yet. I opened Tuesday's compartment first. 4 tablets. 2, I recognized immediately, the small white blood pressure pill Eleanor had taken for years, and the oval cholesterol tablet that had been in her routine since 2015. The 3rd was a pale blue oval I had seen Diana place in the organizer 100 times, always described as a memory supplement, always presented with the casual confidence of someone who has never been questioned. The 4th was small and round, and the color of old bone, and I had never seen it before in my life. I took Dr. Voss's written protocol from my shirt pocket. I had carried it there all evening, folded against my chest, and I laid it open on the counter beside the organizer. She had given me 2 small amber vials of replacement tablets, each one labeled in her handwriting, with instructions so precise they could have been engineering specifications. Replace like for like, same compartment, same position. Do not alter the organizer's appearance in any way. I picked up the pale blue oval between my thumb and forefinger and held it under the kitchen light. This small thing, this small ordinary-looking thing that Diana had placed in her mother's hand every morning for 18 months, with a warm smile and a glass of water, and the words, "Time for your vitamins, Mom." My daughter's hands had touched this tablet. My daughter's voice had accompanied it. And Eleanor, trusting gentle Eleanor, who had never in 35 years of marriage given me a single reason to doubt the people she loved, had swallowed it without question day after day after day, while her mind slowly went somewhere I couldn't follow. My chest cracked open with a grief so sudden and so physical that I had to grip the edge of the counter with both hands. A sound came out of me that I am not going to describe because some sounds a man makes in his own kitchen in the middle of the night are not meant to be recorded. I pressed my forehead against the cabinet door above the counter and breathed hard through my nose until the wave passed. Then I straightened up. I replaced every unrecognized tablet in every compartment with the corresponding substitute from Dr. Voss's vials. I worked methodically compartment by compartment, Sunday through Saturday, the way I used to work through a structural inspection, no shortcuts, no assumptions. Every element verified before moving to the next. When I was finished, I put the organizer back on the third shelf above the coffee maker, exactly as Diana had left it. Same angle, same distance from the edge. I took the original tablets and sealed them in a small plastic bag I found in the junk drawer, and I put the bag in the inner pocket of my winter coat in the hall closet. A coat Diana would have no reason to touch in May. Then I stood in the kitchen in the dark, and I said out loud to nobody, "What did you do, Diana?" My voice sounded wrong in the empty kitchen, too loud, too certain, and too lost at the same time. 3 days passed. Diana came each morning with her bakery bag and her bright voice and her practiced routine, and I watched her place the organizer on the table in front of Eleanor with the same unhurried confidence she always had, and I smiled and thanked her for the scones and asked about her drive down from Charlotte, and every word out of my mouth felt like something I was reading from a script I hadn't written. On the morning of the third day, Diana's phone buzzed on the counter while she was helping Eleanor with her cardigan buttons, and she picked it up, glanced at the screen, and typed a quick response with her thumbs before setting it face down again. The whole thing took 6 seconds. But I had been watching for exactly that moment, and I saw what I saw the name on the notification before she flipped the phone. Marcus. On the fourth day, Dr. Voss called. "Mr. Garrison." She said, "The tablets you photographed and sent me, I've had them analyzed. The pale blue one is lorazepam. It's a benzodiazepine, a class of medication used to treat severe anxiety and certain seizure disorders. In a healthy adult at therapeutic doses, it produces calmness and mild sedation. In an elderly woman taken daily in small amounts over 18 months. She paused and I heard her draw a careful breath. It would produce exactly what you've been observing in your wife. The confusion, the memory loss, the disorientation, all of it. Is it reversible? I asked. My voice was very quiet. If discontinued now and treated correctly, yes, we should see changes within 2 weeks, possibly sooner. I was sitting in my truck in the driveway when she called. I had stepped outside when I saw her number, under the pretense of checking the mailbox so Diana wouldn't hear. Through the windshield, I could see the kitchen window, and through the kitchen window, I could see Diana moving around washing dishes and Eleanor sitting at the table, and the whole scene looked so ordinary and so domestic, and so utterly wrong that my stomach turned over slowly, like something heavy shifting in deep water. Dr. Voss. I said, "What I'm about to ask you, I need you to understand that 2 weeks ago, I would have told you this question was impossible. I would have said the person you're describing doesn't exist in my family." I stopped, started again. "Is there any chance this could be accidental? Any chance at all?" Dr. Voss was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, thinking. "Lorazepam is a controlled substance, Mr. Garrison. It requires a prescription. There is no prescription on record for your wife. So, whoever introduced it into her medication routine did so deliberately with access to a controlled substance obtained outside normal medical channels." Another pause. "I'm sorry. I know that's not the answer you were hoping for." I thanked her. I ended the call. I sat in the truck for a long time, watching Diana move behind the kitchen window, her movements easy and familiar as breathing. The woman who came every morning with lemon scones. The woman Evelyn Marsh called the most devoted daughter on Magnolia Drive. The woman I had watched grow from a little girl who caught fireflies in mason jars into someone I was no longer certain I recognized at all. 14 days, Dr. Voss had said. Give it 14 days. I started counting. On the 14th morning, I woke up before dawn and lay in the dark listening to Eleanor breathe. She had been changing so gradually over the past 2 weeks that I was afraid to trust what I was seeing. Little things, mostly. The way she had started finishing her sentences again, instead of trailing off mid-thought. The way she had asked me 3 days ago whether I'd paid the electric bill, a question so ordinary and so domestic that I had to excuse myself to the back porch to collect myself before I could answer her. The way she had laughed, really laughed at something on the television 2 evenings ago. The full laugh I had not heard in 18 months, the one that started in her chest and took her whole body with it. I had been telling myself not to hope too much. I had been failing at that completely. At 6:15 I heard her moving in the bedroom, not the slow, uncertain shuffling of the past year and a half, but a purposeful sound, the sound of someone who knows where they are going and why. I sat up. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Eleanor appeared in the bedroom doorway in her blue robe, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, and she looked at me with eyes that were clear. Not perfectly clear. Not the Eleanor of 10 years ago, but present in a way she had not been present in so long that the sight of it hit me like a physical force, like a wave I hadn't braced for, and I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth to keep from making a sound. "Walter," she said, and my name in her mouth sounded like my name again. Not a word she was trying to remember. My name. Why are my roses so overgrown? I could not speak for a moment. I sat on the edge of the bed with my hand still pressed against my mouth, and I breathed very carefully through my nose until I trusted my voice. "Because you haven't been out there in a while," I said, "but we can fix that." She stepped into the room and sat down beside me on the bed, right beside me, close enough that her shoulder pressed against mine, and she looked at me for a long moment with her head tilted slightly the way she always did when she was thinking something through. "Walter," she said slowly, "something has been wrong with me, hasn't it? Really wrong, not just getting older." My chest split open. "Yes," I said, "something has been wrong." "How long?" "A long time, Ellie, a long time." She reached out and took my hand in both of hers, turning it over the way she used to do when we were young, tracing the lines of my palm like she was reading something written there. Her hands were warm. I had forgotten how warm her hands were. "Tell me," she said, "all of it. I need to know all of it." So I told her. I told her about Dr. Voss and the blood work and the lorazepam. I told her about the night in the kitchen with the pill organizer and the tablets I'd photographed and sent to Dr. Voss and the amber vials of replacements I'd worked through, compartment by compartment in the dark. I told her about the 14 days of watching and waiting and counting and praying to God that I was doing the right thing by not calling the police immediately, not confronting Diana, not blowing the whole thing open before I had something solid enough to stand on. Eleanor listened to every word without interrupting me. Her hands stayed around mine the whole time, and she listened with the focused attention of someone who is hearing difficult things and choosing to hear them fully rather than flinch away. When I finished, the room was quiet except for the birds starting up outside in the magnolias. "She's been coming here every morning," Eleanor said. Not a question, working through it out loud. "Every morning for 18 months. Eleanor looked down at our joined hands. A muscle moved in her jaw. "I remember pieces of it," she said, her voice dropping low and careful. "Like trying to remember a dream after you've been awake too long. I remember feeling confused all the time, frightened like I was inside my own house, but couldn't find my way around. I remember sitting in the garden and not knowing what I was looking at." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she pressed her lips together hard for a moment before she continued. "I remember Diana putting pills in my hand and thinking I should know what they were and not being able to hold the thought long enough to ask. Ellie, let me finish." She squeezed my hands tightly, her grip stronger than I expected, strong enough that it almost hurt, and I was so grateful for that small pain I could have wept. "I remember the staircase. Everything in me went still." "What do you mean?" I asked, though some part of me already knew what she meant and was desperately, uselessly trying to delay hearing it. Eleanor raised her eyes to mine. They were steady. Whatever this caused her to say, she had already decided to say it, and Eleanor Garrison had never in her life started something she wasn't going to finish. "About 2 years ago," she said. I found paper bank statements, transfer records, things that didn't make sense. I was going through the filing cabinet late at night, and I found them, and I couldn't understand at first, and then I started to understand, and I went to find Diana. She paused, steadied herself. We were on the landing at the top of the stairs. She was on the phone with Marcus. I could hear him through the speaker, his voice, not the words. And then she hung up, and she looked at me, and her hands were shaking, Walter. Her whole body was shaking. She was crying. I could not breathe. I sat on the edge of our bed in the early morning light, and I could not draw a single breath. She kept saying his name. Eleanor continued, her voice barely above a whisper, now rough at the edges. Marcus is going to leave me. He said I'll lose everything, over and over, like she was trying to convince herself of something. Eleanor stopped. Her chin trembled once violently, and then she controlled it. I started to walk down the stairs to find you, and then I was at the bottom. The sound that came out of me was not a word. It was something older than words, something that came from the part of a person that exists before language. I pulled my wife into my arms and held her against my chest so tightly I was afraid I was hurting her. And I said her name over and over into her hair. Ellie, 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 like saying it enough times, could reach back through 18 months and pull her out of whatever dark, foggy place she had been trapped in. She held on to me just as hard. Her fingers twisted into the back of my shirt, and she pressed her face against my shoulder, and she cried deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. The crying of someone who has been holding something enormous for a very long time, and has finally found a place safe enough to put it down. We stayed like that for a long time. The birds outside got louder. The light through the curtains shifted from gray to gold. Finally, Eleanor pulled back and wiped her face with the sleeve of her robe, a gesture so familiar and so her that I had to squeeze my eyes shut for a moment. She was crying, Walter, Eleanor said again. Her hands were shaking. I need you to know that. I'm not saying it to excuse her. I'm saying it because it matters. Because there's a difference between who chose this and who was pushed into it and then kept choosing it. I looked at my wife. After 35 years, I still sometimes forgot how much smarter she was than me. What do you want to do? I asked. Eleanor looked out the window at the overgrown roses along the back fence, pale and heavy in the morning light, badly in need of someone to tend them. I want every piece of the truth, she said. Before we do a single other thing, I want to know exactly how deep this goes. All of it, Marcus included. She turned back to me, and her eyes were red-rimmed but absolutely certain. And Walter, I don't want Diana to know I'm back. Not yet. I stared at her. Ellie, if she thinks I'm still confused, she'll keep doing what she's been doing. And if she keeps doing what she's been doing, we have time to find out everything. She reached up and put her hand on my face, her palm warm against my jaw. Can you trust me on this? I turned my face into her hand the way I had been doing for 35 years, whenever the world felt like too much. Always, I said. I have always trusted you. Outside, the magnolias were moving in the early morning breeze, and somewhere in the back garden, Eleanor's roses were waiting. I had not looked at our bank accounts in 2 years and 4 months. That fact, when I finally sat down and faced it, hit me with the particular shame of a man who prides himself on being careful and realizes he has been anything but. I was a civil engineer for 32 years. I built things that had to hold weight, real weight, the kind that doesn't forgive miscalculation. I understood load distribution and stress tolerance and the catastrophic consequences of a single overlooked flaw in a foundation. And I had handed the financial foundation of my family's entire life to my daughter and her husband without ever once checking whether it was holding. It was past midnight when I opened the laptop at my desk. Eleanor was asleep, genuinely asleep, not the drugged unconsciousness of the past 18 months, but real sleep, the kind that comes with dreams. And twice already that week, she had told me about her dreams over breakfast in the morning, and both times I had had to look down at my coffee cup so she wouldn't see my face. I logged into our joint account for the first time since the spring of 2022. For the first 10 minutes, I told myself I was misreading it. This was the thing about numbers. When they are telling you something you do not want to know, your mind finds ways to reinterpret them. Rounding errors, transfer timing, legitimate expenses you had simply forgotten about. I went through every stage of that particular denial with the thoroughness of a man who has spent a lifetime being precise, because being precise gave me somewhere to put my attention while the truth assembled itself in the background. By midnight 30, the truth was fully assembled. They had started small. February of 2022, a transfer of $2,300 to an account I didn't recognize listed as home care services. I searched my memory and found nothing. There had been no home care services in February of 2022. Eleanor's decline had only just begun. We hadn't needed outside help yet. March, $4,000. Medical consultation fees, the notation said. April, $6,800. The amounts climbed in the way that a structural crack climbs slowly at first, then faster, each new increment making the next one seem proportionally smaller than it was. By the end of 2022, the monthly transfers had reached $15,000. By mid-2023, they had doubled. The notations grew more elaborate as the amounts grew larger. Property maintenance, specialized memory care, consultation, therapeutic equipment, nutritional supplements. Each one plausible enough on its own. Each one accompanied by what appeared to be a corresponding invoice. I pulled up the invoice files Diana had organized in our shared drive. They were meticulous. Company letterheads, itemized line items, service dates, provider signatures. The work of someone who had been very careful over a very long period of time to make sure everything looked exactly right. I printed the most recent invoice, $3,200, for something called Cognitive Support Services, LLC, and I held it under my desk lamp and looked at Eleanor's signature at the bottom. Eleanor had not signed this. I knew her signature the way I knew her handwriting on birthday cards and grocery lists and the margins of library books she'd loved. I knew it the way you know the particular sound of one person's footsteps in a house you have shared for 30 years. This signature had the right shape but the wrong weight. The pen had moved with the careful deliberateness of someone copying, not the unconscious ease of someone writing their own name. My wife's signature, forged, on an invoice for a company that, when I searched it, did not appear to exist anywhere in the state of Georgia. I pushed back from the desk and stood up and walked to the window and stood there with my hands on the windowsill and my forehead nearly touching the glass, looking out at the dark street, the streetlight, the shadow of Evelyn Marsh's magnolia tree across the road. $587,000. That was the number when I added it all up. Not an approximation, not a rough figure. $587,000 removed from our retirement accounts, our savings. The equity line on the house, the accumulated careful work of a lifetime, funneled out in carefully sized increments over 2 years and 3 months, disguised as the cost of caring for a woman who was being made to need care in the first place. I went to the kitchen and drank a full glass of water standing at the sink. Then I went back to my desk, picked up my phone, and sent a text message to Ray Kowalski. Ray and I had known each other for 12 years, through the Savannah Neighborhood Watch program I had been involved with, back when the kids were teenagers. He was a detective with the Savannah Police Department, 23 years on the job, the last 8 in financial crimes and elder abuse cases. I had called him twice over the years about things that turned out to be nothing. He had never once made me feel foolish for calling. The text I sent him at 12:47 in the morning said, "Ray, I need to meet with you, tomorrow, early somewhere away from my house. It's about my family, and it's serious. Please don't call the house phone." His reply came back inside of 4 minutes, which told me he was still awake, and that he was the kind of man who reads late-night messages from old acquaintances with the instinct of someone who has learned that late-night messages are often the ones that matter most. It said, "Bull Street Coffee, 7 a.m. I'll be there." I sat back in my chair and looked at the printed invoice on my desk, Eleanor's forged signature catching the lamplight. Around me, the house was quiet, the refrigerator, the old wood, the distant river, all the sounds of a life that had been built carefully and was still somehow standing. In the morning, Diana would arrive at 8 with her bakery bag and her color-coded pill organizer and her warm practice smile. She would help Eleanor with her cardigan and make sure she took her vitamins and tell me what a pleasure it was to be able to do this for her parents. And Eleanor would play her part. She had practiced it the day before, sitting in the kitchen with me, doing the soft, unfocused expression, the trailing sentences, the gentle confusion that had become so familiar over the past 18 months, that putting it back on was, she told me with a ghost of her old dry humor, disturbingly easy. I turned off my desk lamp and sat for a moment in the dark. $587,000, 2 years and 3 months. An entire lifetime of careful work converted into fraudulent invoices and wire transfers and the forged signature of a woman who had spent 30 years teaching other people's children to read. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes until I saw light. Then I straightened up, put the invoice in a folder, and went to bed. There was a great deal of work to do tomorrow, and I was going to need to be steady enough to do it. Bull Street Coffee opened at 6:30, and Ray Kowalski was already there when I arrived at 7:05, sitting at the corner table farthest from the door with a black coffee and a yellow legal pad, and the particular stillness of a man who has spent 23 years learning how to wait. He stood when he saw me, not the polite half-rise of social courtesy, but a full stand, the kind that says, "I take this seriously." Ray was 51 years old, broad through the shoulders, with close-cropped gray hair and a face that had been lived in hard and hadn't apologized for it. He had the eyes of someone who had heard a great many terrible things and had learned to receive them without flinching, which was, I realized as I sat down across from him, exactly what I needed this morning. "Walter," he said, and his voice was the same low, steady register I remembered from 12 years of neighborhood watch meetings. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," I said. "Not really." I put the folder on the table between us, the printed bank statements, the fraudulent invoices, the photograph of Eleanor's forged signature, beside a genuine sample I had found in our files at home. Ray opened it without preamble and began reading, and I watched his face while he did. He was very good at keeping his face neutral, but when he turned to the third page, the one with the total something moved behind his eyes fast and controlled the way a current moves under still water. 587, he said. "Yes. Over how long?" 2 years and 3 months, starting February 2022. He turned another page. "And the person with access to the accounts, my daughter," I said. "Diana and her husband, Marcus Cole. Marcus runs a corporate consulting business, or says he does. Diana has had full access to our joint accounts since late 2021. I authorized it." The last 3 words cost me something to say. Ray didn't make me feel worse about them. He just wrote something on his legal pad and kept reading. I told him everything, then Dr. Voss, the lorazepam, the 14 days of replacement medication, Eleanor's recovery, what Eleanor remembered about the staircase. I told him about the camera. That was the moment Ray looked up. "What camera?" he said. "Security camera. I installed it 7 years ago after a break-in 2 streets over mounted near the bookshelf in the living room. When Eleanor got sick, I stopped thinking about it. I never mentioned it to Diana. I don't believe she knows it exists." Ray set his pen down very carefully on the legal pad. "Walter," he said, "is that camera still recording? It records to a hard drive in my desk drawer, overwrites every 30 days unless I back it up manually." I reached into the folder and pulled out the last item, a USB drive. "I backed up the last 8 months last night." Ray looked at the USB drive on the table between us for a long moment. Then he looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, Ray Kowalski smiled. "I'm going to need to take that," he said. He sent it to his department's digital forensics team that morning, and by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he called me and told me to come back not to Bull Street this time, but to my own house, where he wanted to review the footage with me directly. He arrived at 5 with a laptop and a quiet, focused energy that told me the forensics team had found something worth seeing. We sat at my desk in the back room. Eleanor was in the garden, her hands in the soil for the first time in 18 months, moving along the rose beds with the slow, careful attention of someone relearning a language, and Ray opened the laptop and turned it toward me. "There are 11 incidents of note over the past 8 months, he said. "I want you to see this one first." The timestamp read 7 months ago. The camera angle covered the living room and the near half of the kitchen, enough to show the counter where Diana kept Eleanor's pill organizer, the kitchen table, and the entrance from the hallway. Marcus walked in at 2:14 in the afternoon. The sight of him on that screen in my house and my kitchen, moving through my home with the ease of a man who has never once questioned his right to be there, sent a bolt of something through me so sharp and sudden that I grabbed the edge of the desk with both hands. My knuckles went white. "He came when you were gone," Ray said, his voice level. "Cross-reference the timestamps with your phone's location data. You gave me permission to access that this morning. Every time Marcus appears in this footage, you are not home." On the screen, Diana appeared from the hallway. She had clearly not expected him. Her body went rigid when she saw him, a full-body flinch that she immediately tried to smooth over. And watching that flinch, that involuntary contraction of someone who has learned to be afraid of a person's sudden presence, made my stomach drop so hard and fast, I pressed my hand flat against it. Marcus spoke to her with his back partly to the camera, so his words were unclear, but his posture said everything, leaning forward, shoulders squared, the stance of someone applying pressure. Diana's responses were visible, even without hearing them. Clearly, her hands came up in a placating gesture, then dropped, then came up again. Her head shook. She stepped back. He stepped forward. Then his voice rose just enough for the camera's microphone to catch. "You stop now, and everything comes down on you. You understand that? Every signature, every transfer, every account. Your name. Not mine. Yours." Diana's face crumpled. Her hands flew up to cover her mouth, and the sound she made, small and high and broken, came through the laptop speaker and hit me somewhere so deep I stopped breathing for a full 3 seconds. That's enough," I said. My voice did not sound like my voice. Ray paused the footage. "There are 10 more incidents," he said carefully. "Similar pattern each time. He comes when you're out, applies pressure, leaves. The most recent was 3 weeks ago." He paused. "Walter, based on what I'm seeing here and the financial documentation you've brought me, I can tell you that what Marcus Cole has done constitutes elder financial abuse under Georgia Code 30-5-8, conspiracy to commit fraud and coercion. These are serious felonies. The camera footage is legal. You installed it in your own home. You own it. It's fully admissible." "And Diana?" I asked. My throat was so tight the words barely fit through. Ray was quiet for a moment. "Diana is on the financial documents. Her name, her signatures, even the forged ones, create legal exposure for her because she facilitated the forgeries, the staircase incident, and the medication." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Those are separate charges that carry their own weight. I won't mislead you about that." I looked at the frozen image on the laptop screen, Diana with her hands over her mouth, caught in the moment, right after Marcus's threat. Her face, the face of someone trapped so completely, they have forgotten what the outside of the trap looks like. "She was crying," I said, more to myself than to Ray. "Eleanor said Diana was crying on the staircase that night, shaking." "I know," Ray said, "and that matters. It matters in terms of how charges are ultimately assessed and sentenced. But, Walter, he waited until I looked at him. It doesn't change what happened. It changes the context. Context matters in court. It doesn't erase the actions." I sat back in my chair and pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes until the pressure was almost painful. "What do we do next?" I asked. "We find out everything Marcus has planned," Ray said, "because I don't think he's finished, and I don't think he intends to be around when the consequences arrive." Outside through the window, I could see Eleanor kneeling in the garden, her hands moving carefully through the soil around her rose bushes, her white hair bright in the late afternoon Georgia sun. She looked up once toward the house, and even from this distance I could see that her eyes were clear. I had almost lost her, and now she was out there bringing her roses back to life, and the man who had tried to take her from me was on a laptop screen in my office, and tomorrow he would walk into my home not knowing that every move he had ever made inside these walls had been recorded. "Tell me what you need from me," I said. Ray picked up his pen. "Let's start from the beginning," he said. "Before I tell you what Detective Kowalski found in those financial records, something that changed everything. We thought we understood about Marcus Cole. Drop the number 9 in the comments right now. Let me know you're still here with me. Just a reminder, this story contains some fictional elements woven in for storytelling purposes. If that's not something you'd like to continue with, this is a good place to step away, no hard feelings at all." Ray called on a Thursday morning and asked if he could come by the house. He arrived with a manila folder that he set on the kitchen table without preamble, and something in the way he sat down carefully. The way a man sits when he is carrying weight, he doesn't want to drop, told me that whatever was in that folder was going to change the shape of everything again. Eleanor came in from the garden wiping her hands on her apron. She had been outside since 7, pruning the yellow rose bush she called Harold back into something resembling its former self. She sat down across from Ray and looked at him with those clear blue eyes and said, "Tell us, Detective, all of it." Ray opened the folder. Marcus Cole opened a bank account 14 months ago in Miami, Florida. He said under the name Sandra Reeves. Sandra Reeves does not exist. She is a constructed identity, fake social security number, fake address, fake employment history. The account currently holds approximately $340,000 transferred in increments small enough to avoid automatic federal reporting thresholds. The remaining funds, Ray continued, We're absorbed into failed investment accounts Marcus had been running under shell companies. Most of it is gone. What's in the Sandra Reeves account is what he managed to preserve. He paused. This is called structuring. It is a federal crime. The kitchen was very quiet except for the sound of the refrigerator and a mockingbird going through its repertoire somewhere in the magnolias outside. There's more, Ray said. He turned to the next page. We found a divorce filing. Marcus began the process 8 weeks ago through an attorney in Charlotte. It has not been served to Diana yet. Another page. And this. He slid a document across the table. I picked it up. It was a guardianship petition, Diana's name at the top, Walter James Garrison and Eleanor Ruth Garrison listed as the proposed wards. My hands started shaking so badly I had to put the paper down. He was waiting for Diana to complete this filing, Ray said quietly. Once she had legal guardianship over both of you, control of your medical decisions, your remaining assets, everything Marcus planned to finalize the divorce, access the Sandra Reeves account, and disappear. Diana would be left as the legal guardian of record with her name on every fraudulent transaction, every forged signature, every aspect of what happened to Eleanor. He looked at me steadily. She would have had no idea he was gone until it was too late. Eleanor reached across the table and picked up the guardianship petition. She read it slowly, her jaw set, and her eyes moving line by line, with the focused attention of a woman who spent 30 years making sure every child in her classroom understood exactly what they were reading. Then she set it down and pressed both palms flat on the table. He used her the same way he used us, she said. Her voice was low and absolutely certain. Just differently. Yes, Ray said. Eleanor looked at me, and I saw something move across her face, not surprise, not collapse, but the particular expression of a person absorbing a truth that is terrible and clarifying at exactly the same time. She doesn't know, Eleanor said. No, Ray said. She doesn't. Then she needs to. Eleanor straightened in her chair, her shoulders squaring with a quiet resolve that made my chest ache with love for her. Not the police, not lawyers, me. I need to be the one to tell my daughter what her husband was planning to do to her. Ray looked at Eleanor for a long moment, then he nodded. If Mrs. Garrison speaks with Diana first, he said carefully, and Diana agrees to cooperate, we can build a much stronger case, particularly against Marcus. The coercion charges, the conspiracy charges, Diana's testimony locks all of it. He folded his hands on the table. But I need you both to understand something. Diana's cooperation does not erase her own culpability. It mitigates it. There is a difference. I know, Eleanor said. I am not asking you to erase anything. I am asking for the chance to tell my daughter the truth before everything comes down on her head. She paused. She deserves to know what he was going to do to her. Whatever she did, she deserves to know that. I reached over and covered Eleanor's hand with mine. Her fingers turned and gripped mine hard the way they had on the morning she came back to me, strong and certain and warm. When? I asked Ray. Soon, he said. Marcus is moving faster than we expected. The Sandra Reeves account had 2 new transfers this week. He closed the folder. We have maybe 3 weeks before he's ready to run. Eleanor stood up, smoothed her apron, and looked out the kitchen window at the garden she had spent the morning tending. Then I won't waste any more time, she said. Diana arrived at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday morning in early August, the same way she had arrived every morning for 18 months. Key in the lock before she knocked white bakery bag from Drayton Street, swinging from her wrist, the particular brightness in her voice that she put on at the door, the way other people put on a coat. Morning, Mom. Morning, Dad. She set the bag on the counter and pulled out a wax paper sleeve of lemon scones, Eleanor's favorite still warm. Traffic was terrible coming down from Charlotte. Some kind of accident on I-77. You sleep okay, Mom? Eleanor was sitting in her armchair by the window, the one with the faded blue upholstery that she had refused to reupholster for 15 years, because she said it had earned its worn spots. She was looking out at the garden the way she always did in the mornings, or the way Diana believed she always did. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her expression was soft and slightly unfocused. She did not answer Diana's question. Diana didn't press. She never pressed. She moved to the kitchen counter with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done the same sequence of motions so many times they no longer have to think about them. Open the cabinet, take down the pill, organizer, shake the morning compartment into her palm, fill the glass at the sink. I stood in the hallway doorway with my shoulder against the frame, and my heart hammering so hard I was certain Diana could hear it from across the room. We had talked about this moment for 3 days. Eleanor had been calm and certain, in a way that both steadied me and frightened me, the calm of someone who has decided something difficult and has finished being afraid of the decision. She had asked me to stay in the hallway, not to come in unless she called for me. "This needs to be between us first," she had said. "Mother and daughter, before it's anything else." Diana crossed the kitchen with the glass of water and crouched down in front of Eleanor's chair, the way she always did. Eye level, warm smile, the glass extended. "Time for your morning vitamins, Mom," she said. "Blue one first, remember?" Eleanor looked at the pills in Diana's palm. Then she looked up, and she said clearly and quietly and with perfect steadiness, "Diana." Not a question. Not the wandering half-recognition of a woman searching for a word she can't quite reach. A statement. A name spoken by someone who knows exactly whose name it is and exactly who they are saying it to. Diana's smile flickered. Just for a fraction of a second, a small fault line running through something she had believed was solid ground. "Yes, Mom?" she said carefully. "It's me." "I know who you are," Eleanor said. "I know who you've always been." She looked at the pills in Diana's palm. "I'm not going to take those." The glass slipped in Diana's hand. She caught it, but barely water sloshing over her fingers, and she looked up at her mother's face with the first real expression I had seen from her in months. Not the performed warmth, not the careful brightness, but something raw and terrified breaking through the surface like something that had been held underwater for too long, finally fighting its way up. "Mom!" Her voice cracked on the single syllable. "I remember the staircase," Eleanor said. Her voice did not waver. "I remember the papers in my hand. I remember your face." She paused. "I remember what you said about Marcus." Diana made a sound that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. A small, strangled sound, the sound of a person whose last wall has just come down. The glass fell from her fingers and hit the hardwood floor, and shattered water spreading across the worn oak boards, and Diana didn't look at it. She was on her knees in front of her mother's chair, and her hands came up to cover her face, and she began to cry in a way I had never heard from her. Not the controlled weeping of someone managing their emotions, but something deeper and more wrecked than that, ugly and heaving and completely unguarded, the crying of a person who has been holding an enormous thing for 3 years and has just been relieved of it without warning. "Mama," she said through her hands through the crying, and it was the name she had not used since she was 7 years old. "Mama, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Eleanor leaned forward in her chair and put both her hands on Diana's bowed head, not stroking, not comforting, in the easy way just holding, present, firm. "I know you are," she said, "but I need you to look at me." Diana lowered her hands. Her face was destroyed red and swollen and completely open in a way that made her look younger than I had seen her look in years before Marcus, before all of it, when she was still someone who cried without calculating the cost of it. "Tell me all of it," Eleanor said. "From the beginning, every piece." And Diana told her. It took 40 minutes. Diana sat on the floor at her mother's feet, her back against the chair, and she talked in a voice that broke and steadied and broke again, the first transfer small enough that she had told herself it wasn't really stealing, just borrowing, just temporary. Marcus's escalating demands. The night on the staircase, the phone call, his voice through the speaker, telling her she would lose everything. The weeks after, when she had told herself she was protecting Eleanor by making sure she stayed calm and cared for the lies she had needed to believe to keep functioning. The mornings, God, the mornings when she had put the pills in her mother's hand and felt something inside herself go a little more hollow each time. When she finished, the kitchen was quiet except for Diana's unsteady breathing and the sound of the mockingbird outside. Eleanor looked at her daughter for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful and clear and full of a love that had not diminished and a truth that would not bend. "Being afraid of him tells me how you got to that staircase," she said. "It doesn't tell me why you came back every morning for 18 months. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Diana pressed her lips together so hard they went white. Then she nodded. "Yes," she said. "I understand. Good." Eleanor took Diana's face in both hands, her daughter's tear-streaked, wrung-out face, and held it. "Because there is something you need to know about what Marcus has been planning, and when I tell you, everything is going to change. In the hallway, I pressed my back against the wall and closed my eyes and exhaled for what felt like the first time all morning. The hardest part was over. The harder part was just beginning. Eleanor called my name from the living room, and I walked in. Diana was still on the floor, her back against her mother's chair knees pulled up to her chest, the way she used to sit as a teenager when something had gone badly wrong and she didn't know how to make it right. Her face was ravaged from crying, swollen and red and scraped clean of everything she usually kept carefully arranged on top of it. She looked up at me when I came in, and something moved through her expression that I hadn't seen in 5 years. Not the measured look she'd developed under Marcus, not the performed brightness she wore at the door every morning. Just Diana, just my daughter, 36 years old, sitting on the floor of the house she grew up in, finally out of places to hide. "Dad," she said, and her voice broke on the single word like it had been waiting a long time to break in front of me. I crossed the room and sat down on the coffee table directly in front of her, close enough that our knees were almost touching. And I leaned forward with my elbows on my thighs and looked at my daughter's face and said, "There's something you don't know yet, and you need to hear it from me." She wrapped her arms around her own knees and held on. "Okay," she said. I told her about the Sandra Reeves account. I told her about the $340,000 transferred in increments small enough to avoid federal detection. I told her about the divorce filing started 8 weeks ago, in Charlotte not yet served, and I put the guardianship petition on the coffee table between us, her name at the top, our names below it, and I let her read it. Diana read it twice. I watched the color leave her face in stages the way light leaves a room, when the sun goes behind clouds gradually, then completely. Her hands, which had been gripping her own knees, released and fell open in her lap, like something had gone out of them. "He was going to let me file this," she said. Her voice had gone very flat and very quiet, the voice of someone doing arithmetic they don't want the answer to. "Get legal control of your finances, your medical decisions, everything, and then he was going to take the money and go." "Yes," I said, and I would have been left with every document, every signature, every transfer. She looked up at me. "He was never going to stay." "No," I said. "He was never going to stay." Diana pressed both hands over her mouth, and her shoulders heaved once a single violent shudder that ran through her whole body. And then she pulled her hands down and pressed them flat against the floor on either side of her, as if she needed to feel something solid beneath her. 5 years, she said, her voice cracking wide open. "I gave him 5 years. I hurt my mother. I stole from my own family." Her voice rose to something raw and terrible. "And he was just going to leave me holding all of it and walk away." "Diana," Eleanor started. "No." Diana shook her head hard, tears running freely down her face, her jaw tight with a fury I hadn't seen from her in years, a real emotion, unmanaged, undiluted. "No, Mom, let me. I need to feel this. I need to feel exactly how stupid I was." "You weren't stupid," Eleanor said firmly. "You were controlled. There is a difference. But Diana, we don't have time to sit with this right now. Marcus is moving faster than we expected. Ray Kowalski thinks we have 3 weeks before he transfers the rest of the money and disappears." Diana wiped her face with the back of her hand, a rough, impatient gesture. "What do you need me to do?" I heard footsteps on the porch, and Kowalski let himself in. The front door I had texted him when Eleanor called my name, our signal that the conversation had begun. He came into the living room and took in the scene without comment, the way a man does when he has walked into a great many painful rooms in his career and has learned that the pain in them is not his to fix, only to work with. He sat down in the armchair across from Diana and folded his hands and said, without any softening, "Diana, I need to explain your situation clearly because I think you deserve clarity right now more than you deserve comfort." Diana looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Go ahead. If you cooperate, fully testify against Marcus, provide documentation, assist in setting up a recorded confrontation, the district attorney will take that cooperation into account when assessing charges. In Georgia, cooperation in elder abuse and financial fraud cases can result in significantly reduced sentencing. It doesn't erase what you did, it mitigates it. Do you understand the difference? It means I still go to prison," Diana said. "It means you go to prison for less time than you would otherwise," Kowalski said. "And Marcus goes for considerably more." Diana looked at Eleanor. Eleanor met her daughter's gaze without blinking, without softening it, without giving her an out she hadn't earned. "Mom," Diana said, her voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. "Can you ever, is there any way that you and Dad could ever—" "Don't ask me that yet," Eleanor said, her own voice thick. "Don't ask me things that belong to the future when we're still standing in the present. Right now, I need you to make a decision. That's all." Diana closed her eyes. Tears ran down her face and dripped from her jaw onto her hands in her lap. Her breathing was ragged and uneven, the breathing of someone fighting to hold themselves together through a decision that is going to cost them everything, and is the right decision anyway. Then she opened her eyes. "Tell me what to do," she said. "All of it. I'll do everything." Kowalski nodded once and reached into his jacket for his notepad. I looked at my daughter sitting on the floor of our living room. This woman who had been Diana before she was anyone else, who had caught fireflies in mason jars, in this same backyard, and learned to ride her bicycle on this same street, and cried in this same house over 100 things that had seemed enormous and turned out to be small, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet. Something earlier than forgiveness. The first small movement toward it. That evening, after Kowalski had gone, and Diana had driven back to Charlotte to prepare, I called Patrick. He answered on the second ring, his voice bright and distracted, the voice of a man in the middle of a normal day who does not yet know that normal is about to become a word he won't recognize. "Hey, Dad, what's up?" I sat down in my chair by the window and looked out at Eleanor's roses, heavy and red in the August evening. "Son," I said, "I need you to come home. There are some things you need to know, and you need to hear them from me in person." A pause. Then Patrick's voice changed, dropped, focused, became the voice of a man who grew up in this family and has always known when something was genuinely wrong. "I'll be there tonight," he said. Patrick arrived at 11:47 at night. I knew it was him before he knocked, because I recognized the sound of his truck, a 10-year-old Ford that needed a new muffler, and that he refused to fix because he said it had character. Some things about your children, you know, so deep in your bones that no amount of time or distance can shake them loose. He came through the door and looked at me and said, "How bad?" "Bad," I said. "Come sit down." Eleanor was still up, sitting at the kitchen table, with her hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea. Patrick bent and kissed her cheek when he came in, and she reached up and held his face in her hand for a moment, and he let her standing very still with his eyes closed. Then he sat down, and I told him everything. I told it the way I had learned to tell it over the past weeks, in order, without editorializing, letting the facts carry the weight they already had, without me adding anything to them. The lorazepam, the accounts, the forged signatures, the staircase. Patrick did not interrupt. He sat with his forearms on the table and his jaw getting tighter and tighter with each piece of information. And when I got to the part about the staircase, about Diana standing on the landing, while Marcus's voice came through the phone, Speaker Patrick stood up so fast, his chair scraped back across the tile, and he walked to the back door and went outside. I started to follow him. Eleanor put her hand on my arm. "Let him go," she said quietly. "He needs a minute." He was gone for 12 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the microwave. When he came back in, his eyes were red and his jaw was set, and he looked 5 years older than he had when he walked out. He sat back down. He looked at Eleanor and said, "Mom, I am so sorry. I should have pushed harder about Marcus years ago. I knew something was wrong with him." Eleanor reached across the table and gripped his forearm. "Patrick, you told your father. He didn't listen. That is not your weight to carry." Patrick looked at me. "She's right," I said. "I didn't listen. That's on me." Patrick exhaled a long, shaking breath that seemed to come from somewhere very deep. Then he rubbed his face with both hands hard, the way he'd done since he was a boy when he was trying to pull himself together, and he said, "Okay, what do we need to do?" Kowalski came by at 9 the following morning. Diana arrived 20 minutes later, and the 5 of us sat around the kitchen table, where 30 years of family meals had happened, and Kowalski laid out the plan. Diana would call Marcus. She would tell him Eleanor was waking up faster than expected, and that she was frightened and wanted to stop. Marcus, Kowalski explained, would almost certainly come. In person, men like Marcus did not manage crises over the phone when they believed they could control the situation face to face. Diana's phone would carry a recording device legally authorized under Georgia's one-party consent law, meaning that because Diana herself was a party to the conversation and had given her consent, no court order was required. Everything Marcus said would be admissible. Kowalski and 2 officers would wait outside. When he's said enough, Kowalski said, we move. Patrick looked at Diana across the table. Something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the acknowledgement of two people who grew up in the same house and are standing on the same side of something for the first time in a long time. You can do this, Patrick said. Diana's chin trembled. She pressed her lips together and nodded. That evening, all four of us ate dinner at the dining room table together for the first time in years. Eleanor made chicken and rice, simple, nothing elaborate. Nobody talked about what was coming. Patrick told a story about a construction project in Atlanta that had gone sideways in 3 different directions simultaneously, and Eleanor laughed her real laugh, the one that took her whole body, and for 20 minutes the kitchen felt like the kitchen I had known for 31 years. After dinner, Diana helped Eleanor wash the dishes standing side by side at the sink, the way they used to when Diana was young. I watched from the doorway and felt something break open in my chest that was not entirely grief. Diana made the call at 9:14 on a Friday morning, sitting in her car in our driveway with the engine off and her hands gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles had gone the color of bone. Kowalski stood outside the driver's window. He had gone over everything twice already, what to say, what not to say, when to stop talking, and let Marcus fill the silence. The recording device was clipped inside the collar of Diana's jacket, invisible unless you knew to look. You ready? Kowalski asked. Diana stared through the windshield at the front door of the house she had grown up in. Her jaw was tight and her eyes were dry. She had cried everything out over the past 3 days, and what was left underneath was something harder and quieter, and I thought more truly hers than anything I had seen from her in 5 years. No, she said, but I'm doing it anyway. She called him. Marcus answered on the second ring, his voice smooth and unhurried, the voice of a man who has never once in his life answered a phone with anything resembling anxiety. Hey, everything okay? No, Diana said. Mom is waking up Marcus. She recognized me this morning. She said my name like she used to. I think she's remembering things. A pause, short, controlled. How much? I don't know. Enough. I'm scared. I want to stop. I can't keep doing this. Another pause, longer this time. When Marcus spoke again, the smoothness in his voice had not disappeared, but something underneath it had shifted a new register, lower and harder. I'll be there in an hour, he said. Don't do anything until I get there. He arrived in 53 minutes. I watched from the hallway window as his silver BMW pulled into the driveway, as he stepped out in his pressed shirt and his easy posture, as he came up the front walk with the particular stride of a man who has never seriously entertained the possibility of being outmaneuvered. That confidence, that absolute bone-deep certainty that he was the smartest person in any room he entered, had always been the thing that made Marcus Cole dangerous. It was also, as it turned out, the thing that made him catchable. Diana let him in. She stood in the living room with her arms crossed over her chest, and I will say this about my daughter. In that moment, she was extraordinary. Her voice shook just enough to seem genuine. Her eyes were red, just enough to be believable. She gave him exactly what he expected to see. And Marcus, who had spent 5 years learning to read, Diana never once looked past the performance to what was underneath it. You need to calm down, Marcus said, moving toward her, his voice shifting into the low, managing tone I had heard on the camera footage, the tone that was not quite a threat and not quite reassurance, but existed in the territory between them. Eleanor getting a little clearer doesn't mean anything. It happens. You adjust the dosage and... I'm not adjusting anything, Diana said. I'm done, Marcus. I mean it this time. Something flickered across his face. Not panic. Marcus Cole did not panic. But a recalibration, fast and cold, the look of a man updating his calculations in real time. He stepped closer. His voice dropped. Listen to me very carefully. Your name is on every document, every transfer, every forged signature, every invoice. Not mine, yours. He let that land. You walk away now. And when this comes apart, and it will come apart, you are the only person standing in front of it. I walk away clean. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Diana's chin trembled, genuine. You planned this, she said. From the beginning. You were never going to... I needed a way in, Marcus said, and his voice was flat and almost bored, now the voice of a man who has stopped bothering to perform. You were the way in. That's all this ever was. So you were going to go back in that kitchen and you were going to do what needs to be done, or I make one phone call and your life is over. Are we clear? He turned toward the door. 3 seconds later, Kowalski knocked. Marcus went completely still. The knock came again, firm, unhurried. The knock of someone with no reason to rush. Kowalski's voice came through the door. "Mr. Cole, Savannah Police Department, please open the door." Marcus turned back to Diana, and in that single unguarded moment, the mask came entirely off. Not anger, not calculation, but the naked, unadorned face of a man who has just run out of moves. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Then, it was gone. Diana looked at him and did not look away. I stepped out of the hallway. "It's over, Marcus," I said. They took Marcus out first. Officer Davis and Officer Daniels walked him through the front door and down the porch steps in handcuffs, and Marcus went without resistance, head up, jaw set, performing dignity all the way to the patrol car the way he had performed everything else his entire life. He did not look back at the house. He did not look at me. He got into the back of the car with the careful movements of a man who has decided that composure is the last thing he owns, and then the door closed and he was gone. Diana watched from the living room window. Her hand was pressed flat against the glass, and she was shaking, not crying, just shaking the way a person shakes when something very large has finally stopped moving. Kowalski came back inside. He looked at Diana with an expression that was professional and human, at the same time the look of a man who has done this part of the job many times and has never found a way to make it easy. "Diana," he said quietly, "I have to place you under arrest now." Diana turned from the window. Her face was pale and completely steady. "I know," she said. "I'm ready." Eleanor made a sound I had never heard from her before, low and involuntary, the sound a person makes when something hits them, in a place they did not know could be hit. She was across the room before I could move, crossing the distance between her armchair and her daughter in 4 fast steps, and she took Diana's face in both hands the way she had done 10,000 times since Diana was a little girl. "I love you," Eleanor said, her voice breaking open on every word. "Do you hear me? I love you. That does not change. It will not change." Diana's composure shattered. Her whole body shook with a single violent sob, and she pressed her forehead against her mother's and said, "Mama, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry," over and over until the words lost their shape and became something older and rawer than language. Eleanor held her daughter's face and said, "I know, baby, I know." Kowalski gave them 40 seconds. Then he touched Diana's arm gently, and Eleanor released her daughter's face and stepped back, and her hands were trembling so badly she pressed them together against her chest to stop them. Patrick was in the kitchen doorway. His face was the color of old concrete, and his arms were crossed tight across his chest, holding himself together through sheer physical force. When Diana looked at him, he uncrossed his arms and said, "I'll be here when you get out. You hear me? I'll be here." Diana nodded. She couldn't speak anymore. Kowalski read Diana her Miranda rights in a low, careful voice, while Officer Daniels, who had come back inside, secured the handcuffs. Diana's wrists were so thin in the metal. That was the detail that broke me. Not the handcuffs themselves, not the formal language of rights and charges, but the thinness of my daughter's wrists, and how small she looked, and how I had watched those same wrists learn to grip a bicycle handlebar on our driveway 30 years ago. They walked her out the front door. Evelyn Marsh was standing at her fence across the street, her pruning shears forgotten in her hand, her face frozen with the particular expression of someone watching something they cannot reconcile with what they believe to be true. She had called Diana the most devoted daughter on Magnolia Drive. She had said it to my face, and she had meant it, and it had been true in the worst possible way. 2 patrol cars pulled away from the curb in opposite directions. Patrick came and stood beside me on the porch. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The street was quiet. Somewhere down the block, a sprinkler came on that ordinary suburban sound, absurdly normal against everything that had just happened. Finally, Patrick said, his voice rough and fractured, "Dad, I need you to know something." He stopped, tried again. "I should have pushed harder 5 years ago. When I told you something was wrong with Marcus, I should have—" "Stop," I said. My voice came out steadier than I deserved. "You told me. I didn't listen. You carry none of this." Patrick pressed his lips together hard. His eyes were wet. He nodded once stiffly, the nod of a man accepting something he hasn't entirely accepted yet, but will come back to. Eleanor appeared in the doorway behind us. She had been crying. Her face showed it plainly, but she had also straightened her spine, and there was something in her eyes that was not defeat. "Come inside," she said. "Both of you, there's work left to do." Bernard Holloway had been our family attorney for 22 years. He had drawn up our will, handled the refinancing on Magnolia Drive, helped Eleanor navigate the paperwork when her mother passed, and left a small house in Valdosta that needed to be sold. He was 60 years old, unhurried in the way that genuinely confident people are unhurried. With reading glasses he was always losing and finding again, and a handshake that made you feel like whatever you had brought him was manageable. I had called him the morning after the arrests. He had not asked unnecessary questions on the phone. He had said, "Come see me Thursday." And I had said yes. Eleanor and I sat across from his desk on a Thursday afternoon in early September, the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead, the sounds of Savannah traffic drifting up from the street below. Bernard had our file open in front of him, thick with the documents Kowalski had provided, bank statements, forensic accounting reports, the recorded conversation from Diana's living room confrontation, Dr. Voss's medical testimony. He read for a long time before he spoke. "All right," he said, finally removing his glasses and setting them on the desk. "Let me tell you where things stand, and I'm going to be direct because I think that's what you need right now." "It is," Eleanor said. Bernard leaned forward. "Marcus Cole faces charges under multiple Georgia statutes. Elder financial abuse under Code 30-5-8. That's the exploitation of an elder person, a felony carrying up to 10 years per count. Wire fraud, structuring conspiracy to commit fraud. The recorded admission alone, 'You were the way-in, that's all this ever was,' is extraordinarily damaging to his defense. His attorney will try to argue coercion ran both directions, that Diana manipulated him. The recording makes that argument very difficult to sustain." He paused. "I would expect Marcus to receive somewhere between 10 and 15 years, possibly more depending on how the federal wire fraud charges interact with the state counts." I pressed my palms flat on my knees. 15 years. The number sat in the room like something with weight. "And Diana?" Eleanor asked. Her voice was steady in the way of someone who has already cried everything they had and is now operating on the clear, stripped-down side of grief. Bernard's expression shifted, not softening exactly, but acknowledging. "Diana faces aggravated assault for the staircase incident criminal administration of a harmful substance for the lorazepam first-degree forgery and elder financial exploitation. Serious charges. Without cooperation, she would be looking at 8 to 12 years. He paused. "With full cooperation, which she has provided comprehensively, the district attorney has indicated a willingness to recommend a reduced sentence. We are looking at 5 years, with the possibility of parole consideration after 3 years served contingent on good behavior and mandatory psychological counseling." Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were wet, but her jaw was set. "She'll do the counseling," she said. "I'll make sure of it." "I know you will," Bernard said. He spent another hour walking us through what our testimony would look like, the questions the prosecution would ask, the angles the defense attorneys would probe, the importance of precision and consistency. Eleanor asked sharp, clear questions that made Bernard glance at her with undisguised respect more than once. She had been a school teacher for 30 years. She knew how to prepare. 3 days before the trial, Diana called from the detention facility. I answered in the kitchen, and Eleanor came in from the garden when she heard my voice, still wearing her gardening gloves, and stood beside me while I held the phone between us so we could both hear. Diana's voice was quieter than I was used to, stripped of its performed brightness, stripped of the careful management she had worn for 5 years. It sounded younger somehow, and very tired and more honest than it had been in a long time. "Dad," she said, "I want you to know something before the trial. I'm not going to fight the charges, not any of them." A pause. "My lawyer wants me to push back on the staircase frame, it as an accident, say I panicked, say I didn't intend, but I'm not going to do that. I know what I did. I need the court to know it too." My throat tightened so fast I had to wait a beat before I could answer. "Diana, let me finish." She said the same phrase Eleanor had used, the same cadence, and hearing her mother's words in her mouth made my eyes burn. "I also need the court to understand what Marcus built and how he built it. Not to excuse myself, just so the whole picture is there." Another pause, shorter. "Is that okay? Is that what you need from me?" Eleanor leaned toward the phone. "That's exactly what we need," she said. "That's the truth. That's all we've ever needed from you. A silence on the line that was not empty full rather of everything that couldn't be said in a phone call from a detention facility 3 days before a trial. Then Diana said very quietly, "Mom, I'm sleeping better than I have in 3 years." Eleanor pressed her free hand over her mouth. Her shoulders shook once. "That's good, baby," she managed. "That's a good sign." After we hung up, Eleanor stood at the kitchen counter with her gardening gloves still on, and her head bowed, and I put my arms around her from behind and held her. And neither of us said anything for a long time because there was nothing left to say that our 35 years together hadn't already taught us how to carry. The morning of the trial, I woke at 4:30 and found Eleanor already in the kitchen, dressed and sitting, with her hands folded on the table the way she used to sit before school concerts, before parent-teacher nights, before every important thing. She looked up when I walked in, and the steadiness in her face moved me more than any crying had. "I'm ready, Walter," she said. I sat down across from her and took her hands in mine. "So am I," I said. Chatham County Courthouse stood on Montgomery Street, the way it had stood for over a century, solid red brick and white columns, the kind of building that was designed to remind you that what happened inside it mattered and would be remembered. Eleanor and I walked through the front doors at 8:45 on a gray November morning, with Patrick on Eleanor's other side, his hand at her elbow, the three of us moving together with the particular closeness of people who have been through something that has permanently rearranged them. The marble floors echoed under our shoes. The ceiling was high and cold. Somewhere ahead of us in courtroom 4 on the second floor, our daughter was waiting in an orange jumpsuit, and the man who had engineered the past 3 years of our lives was waiting in one just like it. Marcus entered the courtroom first. Even now, even in an orange prison uniform, with his hands cuffed in front of him, and a court-appointed attorney sitting at his table, because he had burned through his personal savings on the Sandra Reeves transfers, Marcus Cole walked into that room like he owned it. Head up, shoulders back, eyes moving across the gallery with the assessing look of a man taking inventory. When his gaze passed over us, it did not linger. We were variables he had already calculated. I felt Eleanor's hand tighten on my arm. Judge Carol Simmons entered at 9 o'clock and the room rose. She was 62 years old, silver-haired, with the economical movements of someone who has presided over enough human wreckage to know that efficiency is its own form of mercy. She sat, arranged her papers, looked out over the courtroom with eyes that missed nothing, and said, "Be seated." The prosecution presented its case over 4 hours. Kowalski testified, first walking the jury through the financial documentation with the patient clarity of a man who has explained complex things to non-specialists many times and has learned that the simpler the language, the more devastating the impact. He put the number on the board, $587,000, and let it sit there while the jury absorbed it. He explained structuring the Sandra Reeves account, the divorce filing. He explained what guardianship would have meant in plain terms: legal control of 2 elderly people's lives handed to the person who had been systematically dismantling those lives for 3 years. Dr. Voss took the stand next. She was precise and unsparing. She explained lorazepam in language anyone could understand. She explained what daily doses did to an elderly brain over 18 months, not dramatically, not suddenly, but gradually, quietly, the way water erodes stone. She held up Eleanor's blood work results and said without qualification, "This was deliberate. This was not accidental exposure. The dosing pattern is consistent with intentional ongoing administration." Marcus's attorney objected twice during her testimony. Judge Simmons overruled both objections with a brevity that suggested she found them unpersuasive. Then they played the recording. The courtroom had been murmuring at low frequency all morning, the small sounds of people shifting in seats of papers, being turned to the machinery of justice grinding forward. When the prosecution pressed play on the audio from Diana's living room, the room went absolutely still. Marcus's voice came through the speakers with perfect clarity, calm and flat, and faintly bored the voice of a man who had stopped performing for an audience he believed had no power over him. "I needed a way in. You were the way in. That's all this ever was." I had heard that recording 4 times already. I had listened to it in Kowalski's office in Bernard's conference room, alone in my truck in the driveway at midnight when I couldn't sleep. I knew every syllable of it. It still hit me like something physical. Beside me, Patrick made a sound low in his throat. and his hand found my forearm and gripped it, and I let him, and we sat there together, while Marcus Cole's own voice dismantled every defense his attorney had spent weeks constructing. I looked at Marcus across the courtroom. He was staring straight ahead, jaw set, giving nothing away, but his left hand resting on the table in front of him had curled into a fist so tight the knuckles had gone white. There it was, the only honest thing he had shown us all morning. Marcus's attorney made his closing argument with the desperate creativity of a man working without adequate material, suggesting that Diana had manipulated his client, that the recording had been taken out of context, that Marcus was himself a victim of a troubled marriage and a wife who had constructed an elaborate deception. The jury watched him with the attentive, unconvinced expressions of people doing their best to be fair to an argument that did not deserve fairness. Judge Simmons looked at the jury as they filed out to deliberate, and her expression was the expression of a woman who has seen a great many trials and knows sometimes before the jury does how a thing is going to end. They were back in 2 hours and 14 minutes, guilty on all counts. Marcus received his sentence the following morning, 12 years in state prison, no early parole eligibility, full restitution of all misappropriated funds to Walter and Eleanor Garrison. When Judge Simmons read the sentence, Marcus finally reacted. Not with emotion, Marcus Cole did not do emotion in public, but something moved behind his eyes, fast and dark, there and gone. The look of a man who had spent his entire adult life believing he was too smart to be caught and has just been required to update that belief. I felt nothing that resembled satisfaction. What I felt was closer to the feeling you get when a structural failure you've been monitoring finally gives way. Not surprise, not relief, just the grim acknowledgement that physics in the end is patient. After the recess, Diana took the stand. She walked to the witness box without looking at Marcus, without looking at the gallery, without looking at anything except the floor directly in front of her feet, one step at a time, the walk of someone who has decided exactly how much courage they have and is spending all of it. She sat down. She adjusted the microphone, and then she looked up. Not at the jury, not at Judge Simmons, at Eleanor. And Eleanor, in the third row on the left side of the gallery, held her daughter's gaze with both hands, so to speak, held it steady and sure and full of everything that 36 years of motherhood had put there, the love and the grief and the unflinching requirement that Diana tell the truth. Diana began speaking at 2:17 in the afternoon, and she spoke for 41 minutes, and she did not stop once. Her attorney had prepared an opening, something carefully constructed about coercion and psychological control, and the documented history of Marcus Cole's manipulation over 5 years of marriage. Diana listened to the first 2 sentences of it, and then said quietly but clearly, "I'd like to speak for myself, if that's all right." Her attorney looked at her. Judge Simmons looked at her. The jury looked at her. "That is your right," Judge Simmons said. Diana folded her hands on the rail in front of her and looked at the jury and said, "I'm not going to tell you I didn't know what I was doing. I knew. Every morning for 18 months, I knew." Her voice was steady in a way that cost her something. You could hear what it cost. The slight tension underneath each word, the effort of staying level when level was not what she felt. "I'm also not going to tell you that Marcus Cole didn't build the conditions that made me believe I had no other choice. He did. Both of those things are true at the same time, and I think you deserve to hear both of them." She told it plainly. The first transfer small enough to feel temporary, large enough to cross a line she could never uncross. Marcus's escalating demands. The way he had dismantled her sense of self so gradually that she hadn't noticed it happening until the person she used to be was someone she could barely remember. The night on the staircase. She did not soften it or reframe it or qualify it. She said, "I panicked. I made a choice. My mother fell." A woman in the jury's second row, far left gray hair and reading glasses, pressed her hand flat against her chest and closed her eyes. Diana continued. She talked about the 18 months after, the mornings, the pills in her palm, her mother's hand open and trusting, below hers the way Eleanor had looked at her with eyes that didn't fully recognize her, and how Diana had told herself that was easier, that it was better this way, that she was protecting her mother from a truth that would only cause pain. She said all of this with the clarity of someone who has stopped needing the lies to be true. When she finished, the courtroom was quiet in the way that courtrooms get quiet when something real has just been said in them. Diana's attorney rose to make his closing argument about mitigating circumstances. He was halfway through his second paragraph when Eleanor stood up. She did not ask permission. She stood up from the third row of the gallery, and something about the way she stood straight-backed, deliberate with the particular authority of a woman who has spent 30 years in front of classrooms and knows how to command a room without raising her voice made everyone look at her immediately. "Your Honor," Eleanor said, "I would like to address the court. As the victim in this case, I believe I have that right." Judge Simmons studied Eleanor for a moment. Then she said, "You do. Come forward, Mrs. Garrison." Eleanor walked to the front of the courtroom. She did not look at Diana's attorney. She did not look at the defense table where the space Marcus had occupied was now empty. She stood before Judge Simmons with her hands clasped in front of her, and she spoke directly to the jury, the way she had always spoken directly to the people she needed to reach. "My daughter was manipulated," she said. "I want this court to understand that clearly because it is true and it matters. Marcus Cole spent 5 years building a prison around Diana's mind before she ever did a single thing to harm me. He isolated her, controlled her, threatened her, and then pointed her in a direction and let her walk." She paused, and the pause had weight. "That is true." She turned and looked at Diana. Diana looked back at her mother with eyes so full they could not hold what was in them, and 2 tears ran down her face in straight lines, and she did not wipe them away. "It is also true," Eleanor continued, her voice dropping to something quieter, but no less certain, "that my daughter came to my home every morning for 18 months. She prepared my medication every morning for 18 months. She looked at me. Her mother, the woman who taught her to read and drove her to school and held her when she cried, and she made a choice. Every single morning, she made a choice." The courtroom was so still, I could hear the fluorescent lights humming above us. "I love my daughter," Eleanor said. "I will love her when she comes out the other side of whatever consequence this court determines is just. I am not standing here to destroy her." She looked at the jury again, at each face in turn, the way a teacher looks at a classroom when she needs every child to understand what she is about to say. "I am standing here because the truth requires both things to be said, that Diana was manipulated and that Diana chose. You cannot have justice without both." She walked back to her seat. The courtroom remained still for another 3 seconds after she sat down, a collective held breath. And then it exhaled all at once, the low sound of people releasing something they had been holding since Eleanor stood up. Diana's chin had dropped to her chest. Her shoulders were shaking, but she raised her head and she looked at her mother, and Eleanor pressed her open hand flat against her chest over her heart and held it there. Diana saw it. She closed her eyes, and something in her face changed the particular expression of a person who has been carrying an unbearable weight and has just been told that the weight is real, that it is not going away, and that they are not carrying it alone. Judge Simmons allowed a 5-minute recess. When court reconvened, she looked at Diana for a long time before she spoke. "Diana Garrison Cole," she said, "you have committed serious crimes against the people who loved and trusted you most. You have also demonstrated through your cooperation with law enforcement and your testimony here today a degree of accountability that this court considers meaningful, not as an erasure of what you did, but as evidence of who you may yet become." She paused. "I sentence you to 5 years in the Georgia Department of Corrections, with eligibility for parole consideration after 3 years served contingent upon completion of mandatory psychological counseling and continued cooperation with restitution proceedings." The gavel came down. The sound of it moved through the courtroom like a stone dropped in still water, out and out and out until it reached every wall and came back as silence. Diana pressed her lips together and nodded once, a single nod, small and certain, the nod of a woman who had decided before she walked into this room that she was going to accept whatever came and was now doing exactly that. As the officers moved to escort her out, she turned back one final time, not to me, not to Patrick, to Eleanor. Eleanor was already looking at her. Eleanor had not stopped looking at her since the moment Diana sat down at that witness stand. She raised her hand, the same hand she had pressed to her heart, and she held it open palm, facing Diana, fingers spread. "I have you. I see you. I am not going anywhere." Diana's face crumpled. She made a sound that was not quite a word, pressed her own hand to her chest for just a moment, and then the officers were guiding her through the side door, and she was gone, and the door closed, and we were left in the courtroom with the hum of the fluorescent lights and the last echo of the gavel and everything we had survived to get here. Patrick put his arm around my shoulders, and I let him hold me up for a minute because I needed it. Eleanor reached over and took my hand. "It's done," she said. I looked at my wife. This woman who had come back from 18 months of fog to stand in a courtroom and tell the truth about the daughter she loved, who had not chosen between justice and love, because she understood better than anyone that you do not have to, and I thought 35 years, and she still teaches me things. "Yeah," I said, "it's done." May came to Savannah the way it always does, suddenly, generously, without apology. One morning, the azaleas were still thinking about it, and the next morning, they had made up their minds entirely, and Magnolia Drive was the kind of street that makes you understand why people spend their whole lives in one place. I woke at 6 and lay in bed for a few minutes, just listening birds in the magnolias, the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower, Eleanor moving around in the kitchen below. Ordinary sounds, the sounds of a life that had found its footing again. I had not taken a single consulting contract since the trial. People had called. I had declined. At 60 years old, standing in our kitchen every morning with coffee going and Eleanor humming something from the other room, I understood something I had been putting off understanding for most of my working life, that the most important structure I had ever built was not a bridge. I found her in the garden at 6:30, the way I had been finding her most mornings for the past 3 months. She was kneeling along the back fence with her trowel and her worn gardening gloves and that focused private expression she got when she was doing something she loved. The expression I had fallen in love with before I even knew what to call it. The roses were coming back. Harold, the stubborn yellow bush in the corner, had bloomed first 3 weeks ahead of the others, as if it had been waiting longer than the rest. "He's showing off again," I said, setting her coffee on the garden wall. Eleanor sat back on her heels and looked at Harold with her hands on her thighs. "He always was dramatic," she said, and smiled, and the smile reached her eyes the way it had when we were young, and I had to look away for a moment at the middle distance of the back fence. Patrick came down from Atlanta on the Saturday, the way he had been doing most weekends since the trial. He arrived with a bag of groceries and a better attitude than any of us deserved, and he and Eleanor spent 2 hours in the kitchen making her chicken and dumplings, while I sat at the table and contributed nothing except the occasional opinion that was not solicited and not needed. "Dad," Patrick said at one point, not turning from the stove, "you know you could help." "I know," I said. "I'm choosing not to." Eleanor laughed. Patrick shook his head. The kitchen smelled like butter and thyme, and something that had been missing from this house for a very long time, and I sat in it and was grateful in a way that had no adequate language. We visited Diana on a Sunday afternoon in late May. The Pulaski State Prison was 90 minutes north of Savannah, a drive through the flat Georgia pinelands that gave you a great deal of time to think whether you wanted it or not. Eleanor sat in the passenger seat with her hands folded in her lap, and we didn't talk much on the way up, not out of sadness or distance, but in the way of two people who have been together long enough that silence is a form of company. Diana was already at the table when they brought us in. She looked different, thinner still in the way of someone whose body is catching up with a simpler life. But her eyes were clear, genuinely clear, the kind of clear that comes from the inside, not from medication or performance or the careful management of someone else's expectations. She was wearing her hair pulled back and no makeup, and she looked in some way I couldn't entirely articulate more like herself than she had in 5 years. She stood up when she saw us. She pressed both hands to her mouth and her eyes filled immediately, and she said through her fingers, "You actually came." "Of course we came," Eleanor said, her voice cracking only slightly, and she crossed to the table, and they held each other across it, Diana's arms around her mother's neck, Eleanor's hands on Diana's back, for a long time, while the room moved around them, and the other families at the other tables did their own versions of this same impossible necessary thing. I stood back and let them have it. When they pulled apart, Eleanor sat down and reached across the table and took Diana's hands in hers and held them the way she had held my hands on the morning she came back strong and certain and warm. "How are you doing?" Eleanor asked. "Really?" Diana thought about it honestly, the way she was learning to think about things. "Better," she said. "The counseling is—" She stopped, started again. "It's hard, but it's the right kind of hard. The kind where you feel worse first, and then you start to feel something else." She looked down at their joined hands. I think about you every day, Mom. I think about what I did every day. I know you do, Eleanor said. Does it? Diana looked up, her eyes wet and earnest and very young. Does it ever stop feeling like something you can't come back from? Eleanor was quiet for a moment, not avoiding the question, holding it the way she held everything worth holding, with both hands and full attention. I think, she said carefully, that some things change you permanently. The question isn't whether you come back from them. The question is who you're becoming on the other side. She squeezed Diana's hands. I watch you every time I come here, and I see someone becoming someone worth knowing. Diana pressed her lips together so hard they went white. Then she exhaled long and uneven and nodded. I sat down beside Eleanor and reached across and put my hand over both of theirs. 3 hands stacked on a prison visitation table in the Georgia Pinelands on a Sunday afternoon in May, and I said, Patrick says to tell you he'll be here next Sunday. Diana laughed. It startled all 3 of us, including her. A real laugh surprised out of her, her whole face changing around it. He's been coming every week, she said. He brings terrible candy from the vending machine in the lobby and acts like it's a gift. That's Patrick, I said. Yeah, Diana said, smiling, shaking her head. That's Patrick. We stayed for 2 hours. We talked about small things, Eleanor's roses, Patrick's Atlanta project, a book Diana was reading in the prison library, a documentary I had watched twice because there was nothing else on. Normal things, the kind of things families talk about when they are rebuilding normalcy from whatever materials are available. When the time was up and the guard indicated we needed to wrap up, Diana stood and hugged Eleanor again, longer this time, and Eleanor held on with the grip of a woman who has learned not to take the holding for granted. I love you, Diana said into her mother's shoulder. I know that doesn't fix anything, Eleanor said, and it still matters. Both of those things are true. You know that by now. Diana pulled back and looked at her mother's face for a long time, memorizing it maybe, or just being in it. Yeah, she said quietly. I'm starting to. On the drive home, the Pinelands turned gold in the late afternoon light, and Eleanor put her hand on my knee and left it there, and I drove south toward Savannah with the windows cracked and the warm Georgia air coming through, and my wife's hand on my knee. She's going to be okay, Eleanor said. Not a question, not quite a statement. Something in between the considered opinion of a woman who has been paying close attention. Yeah, I said. I think she is. 2 weeks later, Evelyn Marsh knocked on our front door on a Tuesday evening with a covered casserole dish and an expression of resolute discomfort that told me she had been working up to this for some time. Walter, she said when I opened the door, I owe you something. I stepped back to let her in. She set the casserole on the kitchen counter and turned to face me with her chin up, in the way of a woman who has decided she is going to say a difficult thing and is going to say it properly. I saw things over the past 2 years that I told myself weren't my business. The way Marcus spoke to Diana when he thought I wasn't near enough to hear. The way Diana always seemed to be watching for something when she was outside. I told myself, it's family, it's not your place. She stopped, her jaw tightened. I should have said something. I looked at my neighbor of 22 years, standing in my kitchen, holding a casserole she had cooked, because she didn't know what else to do with the guilt. And I thought about all the ways the people who love us fail us, and all the ways we fail the people who love us, and how most of the time we are doing the best we know how, which is not always enough, and which is still what we have. Evelyn. I said, I didn't see it either, and I was living in the same house. She pressed her lips together. Her eyes were bright. That's kind of you. It's true, I said. Come have dinner with us. She stayed for 2 hours. Eleanor talked about the roses. Evelyn talked about her grandchildren. I ate 2 helpings of the casserole, which was excellent, and said so. And Evelyn told me the recipe was nothing special, which meant it was a family recipe she'd been making for 40 years. After she left, Eleanor and I sat on the back porch in the warm May evening, with the last of the light going out of the sky, and the fireflies just starting up in the magnolias, blinking their slow, patient signals to each other in the dark. I had started speaking at the senior center on the 3rd Thursday of each month. Elder financial abuse, the warning signs, the ways that trust gets turned against the people who have the most of it. The room was always full. People always stayed after. They always had stories, and the stories always sounded in some essential way like ours. I think we're supposed to do this. I told Eleanor one evening after I got home from a session still slightly raw from a woman in the third row who had described in a steady voice watching her savings disappear over 3 years before she understood what was happening. "I know," Eleanor said. She was deadheading the roses by the back fence, working her way along the line with her small scissors snipping clean. "I've known for a while." I sat on the back porch steps and watched her work in the evening light. This woman who had come back from a place I couldn't follow her into, who had woken up one morning and decided that the truth was more important than the comfort of not knowing it, who had stood in a courtroom and said the hardest possible thing with both love and clarity intact. The roses were at their peak, deep red near the gate, pale pink climbing along the fence posts, and Harold in the corner, yellow and excessive and utterly himself, blooming like he had something to prove. I thought about the night I had stood in the kitchen with a pill organizer and a terrible suspicion and hands that would not stop shaking, and I thought about the morning Eleanor had asked about her roses, and I had understood that she was coming back, and I thought about Diana in a visitation room with her arms around her mother's neck, and I thought about Patrick's truck with the muffler that needed fixing, and probably always would. I thought about all the ways a family can break, and all the ways it can decide, even so, to hold. Eleanor came to sit beside me on the porch steps, setting her scissors down and pulling off her gardening gloves, and she leaned her shoulder against mine, the way she had been doing for 35 years. And we sat there together while the fireflies did their slow, patient work in the magnolias, and the sky went from gold to purple to the particular deep blue of a Savannah night. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. We didn't need to. Looking back at this family story, I keep returning to one truth I wish someone had told me sooner. The people most capable of hurting you are the ones you never thought to protect yourself from. I trusted completely. I looked away when looking away was easier. I told myself that love was enough of a reason not to ask questions. Don't be like me. When something feels wrong inside your own home, when the person you trust most seems different, when money moves without explanation, when you're gently steered away from asking, ask anyway, ask loudly, ask twice. God gave me Dr. Voss and a camera I had forgotten about, and a wife strong enough to come back and tell the truth. I don't take any of that for granted. This family betrayal didn't break us, but it changed us permanently. And I think that's the honest ending most family stories like ours deserve. Not a fairy tale, just survival and the slow, difficult work of choosing each other again anyway. My personal belief, no amount of financial desperation justifies what was done here, and no amount of love erases accountability. Both things are true. They have to be. If this family betrayal touched something in your life, if you recognized a warning sign or thought of someone you love, please share this story. Leave a comment below and tell me what you're thinking. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment. Thank you sincerely for staying until the very end of this family story. The stories ahead contain some fictional elements crafted purely to educate and illuminate. If that's not the content you're looking for, no hard feelings. Choose what's right for you and take good care of yourself out there.